So, okay, great. All right, CIS 311, spring term. So glad to have you here. We're going to try to do as much as we can using YouTube, and we'll just see if it helps us out. I think a person should be able to blaze through this material and go as quick as possible. I'm kind of inspired by a lot of the podcasts that gets created at Stanford CS, where I think the world learns how to do iPhone via, David Hagarty up at Stanford, who just does his iPhone lectures, and he was one of the people who created the fundamental language that runs under the iPhone. So I think that when you have a person that good to talk, you just allow them to just go, and later you can slow things down. And the truth of it is when you have somebody who's been coding in a language for 40 years, they're probably overqualified. But the students end up doing a lot better work in those environments. That's why you get so much productivity by those students. Now, I haven't been coding CS and JavaScript HTML5 for 40 years. I'm only 43. So there's no way that I'll be as good as David Hagarty. No way. But that's very inspirational to me. So I want to try it out and to see how we benefit from it. Personally, I want to try to figure out how you guys learn, how you guys and girls learn. And so this is going to be a little bit of a trial and error. But I find that when I visit with folks who are learning a coding framework for the first time, that the YouTube is something that they do in fact use. So we'll go ahead and try that. Already there's some, I broke open Eclipse, right? And this is just a huge blank space. Eclipse is quite helpful to me because, really I use it to make, to do web development where I do server side. I use it to do Android projects. I've used it to do just plain single HTML websites, which is what we're going to largely be working on. I think Eclipse still has kind of captured the imagination of the computer science community because you can just do just about anything with one browser. And so many frameworks are really available simply because basically it's just Eclipse, but it's running whatever new language. Like Adobe Flex is something that people were doing for quite some time. It's very practical for doing rich internet applications and software as a service. But it's done inside of a Eclipse environment. Now, my thoughts are, for example, you guys were experimenting with Adobe brackets. This thing is awesome. I don't see why you don't just use this thing. Like, forget Eclipse, just do this thing. Another fun project is Google Web Designer, which helps to whip up very cool HTML5 environments. Now, I think the big joke here is, okay, here's Google Web Designer. Looks awesome. Yeah, it looks a whole lot like Adobe Brackets. I think there's a general, Silicon Valley culture that that A provides the IDE, and then a lot of people are making variations on this IDE. So let me say that you guys are in a framework explosion. I mean, some of you have probably done a fair amount of web development where you're actually writing JavaScript right in the browser. I think there's JS Fiddle, which is an absolute icon where you can actually try JavaScript right here in the browser, and you can see what its results are. To me, I think that's a little bit of a joke because people were initially learning from the W3 Schools website, which frankly I think no one likes to admit it, but is incredibly influential on the way that people work. And really, you just type in stuff here and then you try it out. And W3 Schools is like the ultimate old school reference. Everybody I know, it goes here all the time. It's probably the most search engine optimized, website, resource on the internet. But there are many ways to get your code working. To me, I think you can flirt with different coding integrated development environments. To me, I'm just an Eclipse person, and if I were to do a machine learning piece, that's going to happen inside of Eclipse. Where you can have Java that just simply talks to the cloud. It's just going to look at data. It's going to grab huge pieces of data down, look for patterns, run aggregation, run pattern characterization, categorization schemes. There's plenty of things you can write that's just plain Java. That will be really interesting. And hopefully we get a chance to talk more about that. You notice there's here, let's delete this. There's an Amazon Web Services development environment that's built in here. And what you're really doing with Eclipse is you're saying, okay, let's install some new software. And then if you can find the download site, and I like to, I do a lot with Amazon Web Services, which I think is pretty common. I don't think Amazon Web Services is, is an outlier of any sort. I can actually go to this URL here and then go ahead and download all of Amazon's sort of tools, their core management, their core deployment. I know in this course we're going to do a ton with Amazon Web Services. So I want you guys to be able to exit a class like this here in LA, in the outer banks of LA County, in the university environment, and then walk on into a Venice or a Silicon Valley or a San Francisco and be very much at home with the way that people are making websites right now. I think usually the debate that I get among students is, should we be using, Python to do this stuff, or should we be using, Java for, web development? I really like this debate very much. Frankly, I think Java is kind of winning. And that's kind of disappointing to folks who really like to learn a new programming language more than they like to make money itself. Does that make sense? If you're in the iPhone world, the folks have adopted Swift so readily, and that's great. But the thing about Swift is that we have the ability to develop a lot of iPhone without the prevalence of Swift. But I've never heard developers more excited about any iPhone feature than the arrival of Swift. Just the presence of new programming languages is just cause for celebration in computer science programming circles. I tend to curb my enthusiasm when I hear of new frameworks because I've never seen a programming language that facilitates much of anything. Even if you like PHP, which is a tremendous, there would not be a Facebook if it were not for PHP. Frankly, it's that close integration of the MySQL and a scripting language. Everything through about 2008 has been focused around PHP. PHP is God's gift, but has PHP ever made anything, easier? PHP is a very sophisticated, object-oriented, very scalable, very articulate, highly typed language. It's not like PHP in itself has made things very much easier. I remember when Ruby on Rails came out, and frankly, we were looking at sites like Twitter, frankly saying, well, we want to do everything with the Ruby on Rails methodology. And frankly, I got very deeply into Ruby on Rails, and I found that when things go wrong inside of Ruby on Rails, it's like owning a VW microbus. Like you really got to like getting out and fixing it on the side of the road. And unfortunately, I think that gets in the way of a lot of the real practicalities of what needs to take place. So let me say that there's never going to be a framework that just kind of solves all of life's problems. That's mythical. Whatever you do, you just choose a language and you just go to town with it. If you're addicted to Ruby, that's great. You just do everything with Ruby. If you're addicted to JavaScript, that's great. Just do everything, on JavaScript. I mean, part of what you do when you do web dev is you actually develop code that sits on the server itself. And so now for folks who love, JavaScript and the client side, which takes a lot of learning, now you can just write the same JavaScript language on the server. Of course, I mean, that makes all the sense in the world. So there's going to be a very good community that's all about Node.js. The techniques that you're going to be using through much of this class is going to relate to the AWS JavaScript software development kit. And what I've had to do in my career is, as a teacher, I don't want to call you an entrepreneur because you're not the economic beneficiary of what you teach. But what you do need to do is you're an entrepreneur with other people's lives. So you directly benefit the economics of every student that you meet. And so among the thousands of young people that I've had the chance to work with, I have to think about where their own job market is headed. There would not be a Bernie Sanders movement where he says basically, hey, guess what? If you took classes and you're a big failure, forget it. We're going to refund it all. Sanders is trying to refund the failures of a generation moving out into the labor market. And I don't like to blame those young people as much as, because they're partly to blame, but I like to also blame a little bit of the education establishment by saying, hey, you're playing with people's lives. You need to give them skills that will be valued not today, but in 3 years. And frankly, I think there's a couple of obvious things that are going to happen in the next couple of years by the time that you folks are graduating. And the best of firms are already making those changes. So, are we going to learn Node? No. Are we going to learn Java for the server? No. Are we going to learn Ruby on the server? No. We're going to learn Python on the server? No. Are we going to learn, and so you're like, well, the only thing you guys are going to learn by the end is ASP.NET, because here at Cal Poly we have a deep commitment to enterprise computing. So you're going to know ASP on the server. But what's happening in the browser right now that is really, really economically important is that folks are doing serverless JavaScript, where you have a single HTML web page, and look, mono servers. And what you're doing is you're getting rid of the sysadmin about a year ago. This is very new. I think it's about 3 years that people have been trying to code JavaScript without any server side. Frankly, we could not imagine doing serverless web development if it were not for Amazon Web Services. AWS is the biggest thing that's happened in IT with that bar for the last 8 years at least. Probably 8 years at most, really. There wasn't much of Amazon before that. I think 2007 is the beginning of AWS. But AWS is now so significant that it's just gaining billions of dollars in new clients every quarter. And that's not an old trend, it's a very new trend. And it's beginning to suggest to us that big computing environments, especially where you have a big college campus or you have a corporation or you have a branch of the military that is not in itself a Dropbox or a Twitter, where they are a pure IT organization. Dropbox codes their entire cloud from scratch. Twitter has made their cloud from scratch. Google has made their cloud from scratch. There's probably two handfuls of corporations that make their own IT cloud from scratch. I have all the world's admiration for them. The rest of the world, however, they specialize in making planes. Or in universities, we specialize in teaching people. Or the NFL, they specializing in throwing footballs, right? They're not a core computer science corporation. And so for the rest of us who really need to make good business processes, the third-party cloud is very seductive. And I know there's a lot of kind of storage area networking people, and there's a lot of networkers here. Relax. Here at Cal Poly, we're trying to be really at the core of the cloud. Does that make sense? But let me say this. There's a lot of networkers that are going to get automated out of their job, and it's been happening for a very short period at very large infrastructure corporations where really one person now does the work of 5 people when it comes to the cloud. The cloud is just an automation monster. And so for those of us who've been kind of tapping into these kind of public clouds, we can kind of attest that it works, it's secure, and you can stage many, many, many entrepreneurial ventures on the back of these clouds. So what you're going to learn this term is really how to navigate the environment that will be emerging about 2 years from now, where the notion of getting an Amazon account will not be radical, it will be normal. And everybody who's had to make the jump will have made the jump and will have completed the normalization process. And we've seen this happen with many environments. We had to make the same kind of bet with Linux, 15 years ago, where we had to say, well, look, do we need to teach Linux? What is it going to take? And then just gradually people got so used to Linux that if you were to tell Cal Polyers that people had to go through some growing pains to get to Linux, they'd say, come on, give me a break. That's a first world problem. Linux is just an absolutely instrumental piece of the way that we do networking. So I think that what's happened is there's become 2 very different organizations. One is a network-centric organization, like a Twitter. I mean, could you imagine Twitter without the 1-second interval between their deep machine learning and recommendation? Could you imagine Google without their deep categorization and their deep AI? really Google is a networking corporation, and they are kind of posting interesting applications on top of the network. But those are the real elites, the real true elites, like Amazon Web Services. They were a real elite corporation. For the vast majority of the Fortune 500, there is the Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000. They are much more about the applications that they're putting out, and they're less concerned about how their network works. They know that their network is a cost center. They know it costs money. They know that networkers cost money. That's all that they need to make a decision as to whether they go to an Amazon or whether they build their cloud in-house. And I've been kind of banging the drum about that a little bit here. And I think what we've done here at Cal Poly is we say, well, we're not going to train young people to be outsourced. We're going to train them to work at the core of the cloud, if so be it. So I think actually the arrival of the cloud will benefit deep polytechnic schools like Cal Poly. But it may not benefit a lot of these other kind of fly-by-night networking programs, at the community college level, where young people are like worshiping Windows Server. Because frankly, I think Windows, Microsoft Azure, is just going to come about, and Microsoft is just going to say, you know what, guess what? Don't own Microsoft software. Just let us run it for you, and just go to our web portal and configure what you want on your desktop. We'll deliver 1,000 desktops for you. That's the way that Microsoft has reinvented themselves. And that's the next step for them to take, and it's gradually getting there. I mean, imagine just plugging on your computer, and if your computer is infected with viruses, just say, Microsoft, reboot this machine, and you get a new system image in a few minutes, and you're booted up. That's the next trend. That's the next transition point for corporations like Microsoft. Certainly, the business strategic drivers are favoring these third-party clouds, and it doesn't matter if it kills millions of jobs. That's not the purpose of the economy. The purpose of the economy is to preserve capital, right? Because networkers, they're always retraining. At AT&T, we've heard the story where AT&T is one of these deep IP networking corporations, but they've been laying off tens of thousands of their networkers who have not made the transition to storage software-defined networking, or SDN. And so AT&T has said, hey, everybody who's SDN trained and capable, you're a part of our future. Please make that transition. They've given them 5 years. There's a lot of folks at AT&T who are seeing people having to leave because they haven't made that transition. So just because you're in IT, it doesn't mean that you're godly, right? The real market dynamics affect people there too. So what we're going to be doing a lot of is you're going to learn a lot of ASP.NET, but you're going to also be having your own cloud that will be on Amazon Web Services, and you need to be aware of those things. It's not about it's not about you. It's about what works for corporations. We'll talk more about that. This is just a quick snapshot. I'm going to quickly save this video just so the RAM on my machine doesn't tap out, and then we'll do some hands-on demo in the next video in a moment.